Hello, everybody that's already in. Thank you so much for joining the session today. My name is Winnie, and for those who joined us last time, we are so excited to be back again today with another session, and this time round on Performance Management 101 as part of our educational series. So welcome, and hopefully you'll find the session just as informative as we have done preparing it for you. Just a few bits before we get started, just so you all know, the session is being recorded. So from a data privacy standpoint, I just want to make you aware of that. But the great thing is that means it will be available to listen back on our YouTube channel whenever you want to, and pick up on some of the nuggets that Bukola will share with us today. So hopefully that will be beneficial for you all. I'm just going to start by giving a brief introduction into Accelerate Black Futures for anyone who's joining us for the first time today. We're very passionate, as our name will probably tell you, about the acceleration of careers and opportunities for Black talent in the working world and also entrepreneurship. And as you know, for many of you in the working world, whilst we all have amazing opportunities potentially to enter the workplace, unfortunately, there are still quite a few diversity issues around representation, especially at senior levels in many organizations. So as it stands, as we know, most of us know, there are no FTSE 100 firms who have Black executives in their top 3 roles. And as it stands, over 30% of Black Africans and Caribbean employees report that they're overlooked for promotions. I mean, I could go into many of the stats around why it's important for us to continue to champion Black talent. But for us, it's important that we make sure we change the narrative around Black talent and make sure that we celebrate the excellent successes that we're able to achieve, but also to promote opportunities for people in our community. And hopefully this session will be one of the many ways that we help you to do that, especially with the session being around performance management, which we'll go into a little bit later. B, if you could pop on the next slide, please. Thank you. In terms of our mission, there are 4 ways in which we aim to achieve our goal. The first is to educate, and we'll talk a little bit more about how we do that. But we also aim to inspire confidence and make sure that every single person who interacts with Accelerate Black Futures has an opportunity to really tap into their core skills and what they already have within them to succeed within the organizations that they are, or just to excel in their own careers, whatever that may look like. We're very passionate about providing practical tools, not necessarily just to make you feel really excited and passionate to do something, but to feel armed with the skills and the expertise to be able to thrive in your roles and whatever your career path may be. But most importantly, we're all about giving back. And that means that for everybody who has a chance to interact with one of our initiatives, the idea is that you are able to give back to somebody else who will be privileged to learn from your experience. In terms of our propositions, we have 4 main ways in which we do the 4 things I've mentioned. One being our group talent program, which is something that's coming up soon and will enable individuals to be able to upskill themselves with the soft skills that are needed to grow in your careers. The second is scale up events, one of which we're here for today. And we have those every single month, either bringing inspirational role models to you or bringing the tools and information that you need to be able to excel in your careers. We also do a lot around online engagement, and we hope that you're following us on our social media, especially on LinkedIn, where we typically post quite a bit of content. And then also we work with some organizations on bespoke partnerships to help to tailor their specific needs. In terms of a very brief insight into our group talent program, it's a 6-week program which is aimed at delegates of 12 to 15 individuals who are early in their careers, and will include lots of pre and post-study elements to enable you to bring back to the group in terms of your learning and be able to coach and grow and develop each other through 90-minute sessions that we'll have each week in a safe peer-to-peer virtual environment. We hope to launch in April for our first cohort, so please do stay tuned for more information on that. And like I mentioned, the Scale Up events is another one of our propositions, and educational events is one of our series where every other month we bring real information and practical tools to help you to excel. And then our inspirational series are every other month where we bring great role models like Lorraine Wright, who we had last month. And we've got so much more in store for you, so please make sure that you're signed up on our mailing list by visiting our website www.accelerateblackfutures.com or following us on all of our social media at Accelerate Black Futures to hear more information about events and other great things that we'll have in store for you very soon. So without further ado, we'll go into our session. I'm so excited to introduce our speaker for today. She's our very own Bukola Bayo-Yusuf. And, you know, Bukola is absolutely a force to be reckoned with. We're very lucky to have her expertise on this topic because Bukola is a phenomenal vice president in the performance management team for a huge global financial services firm, which looks after over 89,000 employees. It's you know, a critical part of her role is focused around how she develops the communication strategy and embeds key messages around performance management to help senior leaders to be able to grow their performance management solutions and enhance business performance. So you're hearing so much information from someone who's hugely knowledgeable and also passionate about the early career space. And we're very lucky to have her as one of our co-founders for Accelerate Black Futures. She's got a strong track record in various HR roles, including talent acquisitions, employee relations, reward, diversity and inclusion. She's been a strategic HR business partner looking after client groups that are global and is also really key in terms of delivery of leadership development. So she's worked with leaders and colleagues at all levels of really large organizations. So like I said before, we are so excited to have her to kick off our first ever educational session. And I don't know about you, but I've brought my notebook because I think there's so much that we have to learn in the session today. So without further ado, I'd love to hand over to Bukola to kick us off.
Real. Thank you so much, Winnie. That was a great introduction. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. I think Winnie said it all in terms of who we are. Just to give you a little bit more around my career background. So as Winnie said, I've spent the last decade and a half in HR. I've done, I think, pretty much every facet of HR that exists. From talent acquisition to development to business partnering, compensation and benefits, you name it, I've pretty much spent some time in that team. But in the last 3 years, I spent it in the performance space, and a core part of my role is to contribute to the policy and the philosophy around performance for a really large organization. So it's a global role, and I touch nearly 90,000 employees. And a key focus is around the 20,000 odd line managers in terms of upskilling them in terms of how performance management works. And funny enough, even though I've had all this experience in HR, I think it's only in the last 3 years that I've cottoned on to the art of performance and how you can really use it as a tool to propel your career. So I was really excited and I was keen to do this at the start of the year to share as much as I've learned in the last few years as a tool so that everyone can kind of use it in their career space, regardless of what's going on in their organization. So if we kick off, because I'm mindful that there's a lot to cover today, a lot of the things that I wanted to start with from a performance standpoint is demystifying some of the myths that exist around performance. So I talk to lots of people and I hear things like, oh, performance is just an annual process. It takes place at the end of the year. It's a dreaded thing that we all have to do the appraisal process. Some people think it's the responsibility of their line manager. So if their line manager doesn't speak to them during the year, that's their line manager's problem. And some people think it's just a tick box exercise. I've heard it all, and this is absolutely not true. One of the things that I say to colleagues and line manager a lot of the time, and I've said this both as someone in the performance space and as a HR business partner who has sat in disciplinaries, mediation meetings, the only thing that a colleague has control over when it comes to their performance is themselves. So you have control over you. So if I say to you performance is great and you say to me, well, we don't really have a performance system in my organization, that's not within your control. Oh, I have a really bad line manager, he's not supportive, she's not supportive, that's outside of your control. What you can do and what I'm hoping that I can share with you today are things that you can do that you're in control of that will make a real difference regardless of the external environment you find yourself. So whether there's a system in place, whether line managers are doing what they should or not, you're in control of how your performance works for you. So that's a key theme that I'm hoping feeds through a lot of the stuff we talk about today, is that you're in control of your performance. After spending quite a bit of time in performance, I think the foundations of performance are really all about great conversations. After all of is said and done, you boil everything down, it's really about great conversations. So the only nuances are who you're speaking to, when you're speaking to them, and what you're talking about. but you boil it all down, it's all about great conversation. So I'll be sharing with you some key tips around how to have great conversations, and then I'll be sharing with you the foundations of performance management. So setting objectives, setting development goals, what's the difference between a performance conversation and a development conversation, what's the importance of regular check-ins, what does timely feedback do for me, and the dreaded annual review process. We'll be going over that as well. Once we go over all of this, we'll have a Q&A session at the end. So please, if you can type any questions as we go through anything I share, if you've got any questions, please just put that in the chat function and then we can tackle that at the end. Now, the only caveat that I will share with you all now is every single foundation on here, so setting objectives, you know, performance versus development, I could probably do a session 2 hours long on each of those. So this performance management 101 session is more around depth and breadth rather than depth. So I'm going to cover the end-to-end process, so how you start off the year, how you finish it at the annual review, but each of those have lots more to go with them. So do keep an eye on our socials. So what I will try and do is provide some depth in some of the content that we put on our YouTube channel, but just bear in mind today is more around breadth. So there's a lot to cover. Just wanted to caveat that, and please ask any questions in the chat function. So we're going to kick off. We'll kick off with great conversations. What's key to a great conversation? This is a key theme for every single foundation we talked about previously. These are the things that are quite important for you to keep in mind. Always be prepared. I've been a victim of this where I probably have a one-to-one with my manager, and sometimes because you're so busy, you rock up to a one-to-one and they say to you, right, what do you want to talk about? And I'm not really prepared. You won't get the best out of a great conversation if you go in there unprepared. What do you want to get out of it? What do you want to cover? Make sure you've got an agenda. Make sure you're listening. I know that sounds really obvious, but when I say attentive listening, that means you're asking questions. That means you're saying it back to them. So you're saying things like, what I'm hearing is X, Y, Z, and then they're nodding to say that that's what they mean. Make sure you're walking away with actionable next steps. Don't just go in there and kind of talk about problems and not devote some time to what you can do about those problems, because you will leave the same way you went into that meeting without knowing what to do. Make sure they're frequent. This is really key. Don't just have one conversation at the start of the year and then wait till the end of the year to have a conversation with your line manager or your key stakeholders. Make sure you set reminders in your diaries, remind to, you know, speak to this person, speak to that person, make sure it's frequent, and make sure it's two-way. A lot of colleagues think going into a meeting with a line manager is the line manager downloading onto them. But some of the key skills that employers are looking for right now is someone who can challenge, someone who can think outside the box. So you should be contributing to those meetings. You should be sharing your thoughts as well. So it's quite key that you're thinking about these conversations as two-way conversations. Setting objectives. Now, this is one where I could probably do a whole session on setting objectives. There's a plethora of information out there, but I've just kind of kept some of the key things I'd love for you to take away. So objectives are kind of like you buy a car and you sit inside and then you plug your destination in the sat nav. That's kind of what objectives are there to do. So it gives you clarity and it gives you direction. Most sat navs, they will tell you, here's where you're going, and there's 3 or 4 options of how to get there. Do you want to avoid tolls? How do you want to get there? So it tells you where you're going. It also gives you direction in terms of how you get there. Now, well-crafted objectives are specific about, you know, the work or the expectation, and it's also showing, you know, what success looks like as a result of the work that you've done. So you can demonstrate that you've done that work. So like I said, this is a conversation you should be having, and the nuance is, who do you have it with? So you typically have a conversation with your manager. When do you have this conversation? You should have this conversation at the start of the year. Now, a lot of the things I'm going to try and pull out from all of the sessions, all of the foundational topics we talk about here is, what can you do to get to the extra mile? So at the minute, having a conversation at the start of the year is what most people do. Now, what takes you to the next level is when you have frequent reviews of your objectives. Objectives don't stay the same. And after 2020, you will agree with me that the objectives that we all had when we wrapped up in January 2020 went out the window at the end of March when we had to work from home, went out the window when we were in second lockdown. So there's always opportunities to go back to the drawing board and say, right, this is what we were focusing on. What should we be focusing on now? What are the expectations now? When you change roles, that's a great opportunity. I know sometimes, especially when you change roles internally, you get stuck into the role and you're just frantically trying to hit the ground running. But it's important that you take the time to sit down and really speak to your line manager and find out what the expectations of you are in that new role. How do you go about doing this? Now, we all know about SMART objectives. I say we all do because there's lots of information in Google. So if you haven't ever heard of SMART objectives, type it into Google and 5 million things will pop out at you. What I really try to do when we talk about SMART objectives is, we all know what it is. It's about, you know, the acronyms for specific, measurable, aligned, realistic, and time bound. And I'm going to talk about that really briefly. But I've got my SMART objectives cover a few other things, again, how to take you to the next level and really make performance work for you. If we stick to SMART objectives for a second, so is it specific? You want to be sure that you haven't been given a generic thing to do. You want to be specific as to what you're contributing to the team. Is it measurable? You should have some numbers in there. You can't just have objectives with words. Is it measurable? Are they saying you need to do, you need to flip X number of burgers? Say you work to McDonald's, it needs to be measurable. How many is expected of you at a certain time? Is it aligned? You shouldn't have objectives that are contrary to the objectives of the business, of the team, of the company in general. So it needs to be aligned. Is it realistic? This has never been more important than in 2020 onwards. I had to have numerous conversations with my manager the minute we had to homeschool. What was realistic in January really became very unrealistic when I had 2 toddlers in the house. I had people that I had to homeschool. I didn't have the capacity to do what I was doing prior to the lockdown. So having conversation about realistic expectations is really important. And here's where that two-way thing comes into play. You don't just sit in the meeting and the line manager tells you this is what I expect. You feed into that. Here's how my capacity is affected. Here's what I can do. What's priority? And that's how that conversation should go. Is it time bound? I don't know if most people are like me, but if I don't have a deadline, I tend to procrastinate. So if I have a deadline of, you know, you have an event to present on the 25th of February, then I get cracking prior to that. If I didn't have a date to do this, it probably wouldn't get done. So it needs to be time bound, and that needs to be agreed across board. So SMART objectives, like I said, there's loads of information on there on Google. But here are a couple of things that I've gleaned in the last few years in terms of how to really make your objectives work for you. Measures of success. Now, people might think, well, that's normal. If you have an objective, you know what the outcome is. What I mean by measures of success is, if I give you a typical example, personal to me, actually, in my talent acquisition days, I was a recruiter, and literally you'd get given a budget, headcount in terms of the number of roles to fill, deadline by when that needs to happen, off you go. Now, I could step into that role and go, well, I need to have bums on seats by X date. That's my objective. Now, measures of success is drilling down to that to find out what those key success indicators are. So, for example, in my case, there was a huge focus on gender diversity. So filling all my 100 vacancies with male candidates probably wouldn't go down well. So those are the extra layers that you need to make sure that you're in tune with, so that when you're executing on your objectives, you're making sure that you can tick all the boxes from a success standpoint. The other piece is around agree. Now, this is really key. In my HR business partnering days, a lot of the disciplinaries comes because one person has one impression of what objectives are and the manager has another, and then you get to the end of the year and someone's saying someone's underperforming and someone doesn't agree. And this is what needs to feature in any conversation you're having around your objectives, be it at the start of the year or if you review it because priorities have changed. You need to make sure that you and your line manager or whoever's assessing your performance agrees with you in terms of what those objectives are and what the measures of success are. Right? Realistic milestones. I've been victim of this. You set an objective at the start of the year, and then when they say, when do you plan to get this by? I just put 31st December and that's it. And the idea is, if that happens, how do you know you're tracking in the right direction? How do you know you're doing things to the right level of progress. So if you break it down into milestones, so say, for example, you're a project manager and you're managing something, each milestone in terms of getting approval for more funding, for example, or approval for the next step to happen, those realistic milestones should feature in your objectives as well, because then that way, when you're having conversations, you can see quite early on if you're not tracking, or if you need support and you need to sound the alarm, guys, something's not right here, I need support, this is not going to happen, I'm not going to hit my benchmark at the end of the year. If you leave it all the way to the end of the year, it's a really uncomfortable conversation to have with your manager. The last thing is around being team focused. And again, this is featured certainly in 2020, where we're all working virtually. Everyone needs to make a little bit more of an effort to keep close to the team, keep close to everyone else, because you can't bump into people making a cup of tea, you can't sit next to people and have a chat. So it's really key that when you're working on your objectives, you're thinking about the team and how you're contributing to the team as well. That will get you extra points from your line manager, for example, because sometimes there's your objectives, but they're team objectives as well. And this is a key skill that more employers are really interested in seeing amongst colleagues. So that's my version of the SMART objectives. Like I said, I could do a whole session on this, but I'm hoping that I've given a bit of food for thought in terms of, if you've already set your objectives for the year, that's brilliant. Go back and kind of tick through this and see if you need to make any changes. And then just always remember, just because you've set it at the start of the year doesn't mean it needs to change. It doesn't mean it needs to stay the same all throughout the year. You need to make sure that it's fit for purpose at all sessions during the year. So I put together a few questions that I think will be relevant to ask yourself if you haven't already put together your objectives. You know, what are my team's objectives? What are my company's objectives? What's key? I did this last year and I saw a huge impact in terms of my relationship with my manager, for example. What are my manager's objectives? The way things work in matrix organizations, sometimes your manager's objectives might be really, really different to yours, depending on how big your role is and how big the team is. It's important to know what your manager's objectives are. Again, this is talking about the extra mile and the extra things that you can do to make sure you're really using your objectives to propel your career. What are your core responsibilities? And I don't mean this in your daily task, come in, read emails, reply to this person. What are your core responsibilities? What does your team do? What does your job do? Where can you make the biggest impact? Again, in 2020 and beyond, this is a key question, because 9 times out of 10, you might have 10 things you want to do, but you might not get to do them all because the way of the world is changing all the time. You know, we're getting told this is how we're going to get out of lockdown, but maybe a couple of weeks, the data swings the different direction and things, you know, go another way. So you need to be aware of where you can have the most impacts, because you want to focus on those so that you have the biggest impacts come the end of the year, regardless of what your capacity looks like during the year. Can I measure progress? That's a key question. If you've got no numbers in your objectives, that's a slight problem because it's not measurable. What does success look like? So similar to when I talked about measures of success before, what are the extra things that you should be thinking about before you can tick all the boxes to say, right, this objective I've achieved, on to the next. So what I was going to show you is just a difference in a couple of examples of objectives that I've come across, and I've come across some shocking ones, I can assure you. So one of the ones I put on here is expand team by recruiting more sales operatives and increase revenue and net profit. Straight away, no numbers in there, so it's quite difficult. You know, no time is indicated. So is this over 3 years? Is it over 6 months? You can't tell. Expand the team. Expand by how many? Increase revenue by, you know, is that a numerical number or is it a percentage? Or it doesn't really clarify what that person is there to do. And it's objectives like these where the line manager and the colleague tend to have different ideas. So I say expand the team, I think 2 people, my manager thinks 10. If we don't document what that is, you can see how there'll be a real problem at the end of the year. A second example, which looks a little better because we can see some numbers in there now. It says expand team by recruiting 3 sales operatives by the 31st of January. So here's a mini milestone to think about, to generate 20% increase in online sales, by the end of the year, the 31st of December. And here's where that SMART acronym comes. So it's aligned with the company strategy. Company strategy is to focus on online market share. I would argue that this can even become more specific in terms of, you know, they've said they want to do online sales by the end of the year. Maybe they have, you know, realistic milestones as to where they want to be by H1, where they want to be by Q3. That will make you, because what you don't want to do is get to November and find out you've only had 10%, then there's a real problem. But you break that down and say, we expect to have 20% by the end of the year, but perhaps we have the first 10% in the first half. And that way you can review it if the objective needs to change based on where you are in the middle of the year because there were extenuating circumstances, or if you just need to push harder. So I'm hoping that's helped from an objective standpoint. I apologize if I'm going really quickly, but there's a hell of a lot to cover. So hopefully I'll be able to ask questions, answer questions during the Q&A session. So if you're thinking about anything, please just make sure you bung it in the chat and we can cover it at the end. So I'll talk really quickly about setting development goals. I like this statement that says to successfully maintain high performance, you have to and you should carry out a training needs analysis at least once a year. And what do I mean by that? We can always improve. No one is 100% perfect. So every year, similar to when you're thinking about your objectives, it's a great time to think about what can I do better in my role? Are there any gaps? Has the industry moved? Is there, you know, a qualification that I should have that will better me in my role? Those are the conversations you should be thinking about at the start of the year. Any gaps in your knowledge and your skills, any gaps in your networking, now's a good time to start thinking about how you breach those gaps. And again, the nuance. So who do you have that conversation with? Normally it's you and your manager, but again, when we think about going the extra mile, I've put stakeholders on here because sometimes not everyone knows what that next step should look like, or not everyone knows what that gap is. So if there's 5 qualifications, for example, how do you know which one's the one to go for? And your stakeholders, so people more senior, people in your network, might be people who can help give direction in terms of your development. When should you have this conversation? Preferably at the start when you're setting your objectives. And a caveat here is whenever you change roles or if you get promoted. Specifically when you get promoted, because the ballpark changes when you get promoted. The expectations are different. So you really want to be clear on any improvements that you need to go away and do to better yourself in that role. And what should you be talking about? So I've put on here a personal development plan. Everyone should have that in addition to their objectives. And I've got a few questions that you should ask yourself when you're thinking about your development. So what's my current context? Where do I want to get to? So again, that analogy about your destination and where you currently are. What skills or knowledge or resources are required? And what steps can I take to bridge those skill gaps? We've put on here an example of what a PDP template could look like. So Excellerate has got a version of this, so we'll make this available. Hopefully it'll be helpful if you haven't got a PDP already. It's, you know, it says what it does on the tin. It's a plan to bridge the gap from a development standpoint. So it has a portion where you can put your current situation, your strengths, the things that you think sell you right now, and any development opportunities, and then your future aspirations. So you can go as long as, you know, long-term 3 to 5 years, or a short-term 6 to 12 months, and really, and you can go back to the SMART acronym and make sure you've got specific actions that you want to go away and do. Speak to your line manager about it, get some buy-in from the manager in terms of supporting you, because the idea is the more you do this, the better you get and the higher your performance is, which is a win-win for the line manager. So make sure you're having these conversations with your line manager. Now, this is a key point for me, and this is something that I talk to both colleagues and line managers about a lot. The difference between a performance conversation and a development conversation. I think most people are clued on to the performance conversation and speaking to their line manager, not so much on the development one. So I just wanted to clarify what I mean by the two. So performance conversations focus on your job. They focus on your day-to-day activities, how you get from A to B in a performance year, and your contribution to the company. Development conversations focus on your career. Someone might say, what's the difference between my job and my career? If I give you an example of, say, a business manager who, no, a project manager who wants to go off and become a portfolio manager or a program manager. Your job might be project manager now, and your conversations with regards to your performance is as you as a project manager now. Your development conversations with your line manager should be, my career aspirations, I want to get to be a portfolio manager or a program manager. How do I get from A to B? So this is about your career in entirety rather than just the job that you do. Performance conversations are normally short term, a performance year from A to B, Jan to December. I know in some places it's at March to April. It's normally short term. Development conversations can look as far as 3 to 5 years. If you're talking about qualifications and promotion levels, if you want to make director at a certain time, it's more long-term driven. So that's a difference between the two. And performance conversations focus on your value. So what do you do in your day-to-day role? How do you contribute to the team? How do we get things done? Development conversations focus on the company's value. How are they going to contribute to your career? How are they going to support you to get to the next level? And I believe when these two are in tandem and these are equally focused on, it can be a real game changer for your career. Now, regular check-ins, something that I encourage a lot. Based on what I've said around objectives, your development plan, regular check-ins are a great opportunity to have frequent conversations with your manager, not just to discuss your performance, which is the short-term view, but also to discuss your development. It's a great opportunity to highlight your achievements. So again, the reason why your objectives should be broken down into measurable milestones is when you hit everyone, you can sell that to your manager, right, 25% by this date. Yeah, we hit that milestone, great. You can celebrate your achievements, but it's also an opportunity to flag any challenges. So if you're not tracking, so instead of saying 20% by the 31st of December, if you break it down to incremental by 5%, say by Q1, by Q2, you can flag any challenges if you're tracking behind any of the milestones that you've set for yourselves. It's an opportunity to discuss any support that you require, not necessarily always about executing on your objectives, but again, on your development as well. If there's any support, if you feel like you benefit from sitting with a team, shadowing a team, this is the opportunity for you to discuss that. Again, the nuance, who do you have conversations with? You and your manager. When do you have these conversations? I normally recommend, so this isn't a rule, but I normally recommend for your performance, at the very least monthly. I normally have a one-to-one with my manager that's very task focused. And I tend to talk about these kinds of things. And then we have a quarterly development catch up where we go through a PDP and then we say, right, how are you tracking with this? Do you need any support here? What are you thinking about? What are you going to be talking about? So I've put together the 3 R's that you should be thinking when you think regular check-in. If you think about these 3 R's, record your peaks and troughs. Now, what do I mean by that? So your peaks are, you know, your celebrations, your achievements, milestones that you can tick the box on. Great, everything's going swimmingly well. Make sure you're having that conversation and make sure you're recording it. Your troughs are, you know, any development opportunities, any challenges that you're coming up with, anything that's stopping you from reaching your objectives. You want to make sure that you're flagging those in these conversations as well. Reevaluate your objectives. I cannot stress this enough. Even last year was a game changer for my team because performance became front and center for everyone, given the change that had happened in our environment. And reevaluating objectives is the key to making sure you're working on what's relevant, that the priorities haven't changed and you're still working on one thing when everything else has moved. So a typical example is basic as, you know, Nando's is open for business, people come in, have food. So maybe your KPIs are on customer service to people in the Nando's branch. We hit a lockdown and now everything is all just takeaway. Your KPIs change because there's no one in the restaurant to kind of talk to, no tip service, no measurements on that side. So everything flows to, what is it, customer service over the phone? Is it how fast the delivery gets done? That's how, you know, a change in the external environment can affect your objectives. So it's quite key that you don't just make assumptions, that whilst it changes, you have a quick conversation with your manager to make sure you can reprioritize. Make sure Any changes, certainly the peaks and troughs, you're recording that, but make sure any changes to objectives that you set at the start of the year, that you're agreeing them and recording them, so there's a record that you can refer to later on. Review your PDPs. Now, you may have agreed to do this perhaps every 6 months or every quarter, but again, if things change significantly, if your priorities change or your objectives change or your role changes, then it's a great time to talk to your manager about that. And again, any changes should be agreed and recorded. A handy tip, so any conversations of these regular check-ins are really just conversations with your line manager, but a handy tip is to make sure you capture a summary of each of those. And I hear, you know, for some people, they might not have a performance system. So I've always worked in large organizations where there's a system in place. But like I said, these are things outside of your control. What's in your control is recording it. So whether you do that in a Word document online, if a system doesn't exist, or if you don't have access to things online, you've got paper, you've got a pen, you date it, you have a record of it, and maybe you share that with your line managers, say, right, the last meeting we had, here's what we did, and then you track it for following meetings. Because the great thing is any actions that are, you know, say you talk about, I've got a challenge here, this is the support that I need. If that's recorded, the next time you have a catch up, you can refer to it, either to say, well, I expected some support and I haven't had it, or I've had it and it's made a great change, or no, it's not really working. But the fact that you've got it to refer to really helps drive those conversations. And the dreaded annual review doesn't seem so horrible because you've got all of these notes from conversations all throughout the year. So for those of you like me who have to write a self-review, for example, at the end of the year, you can just look back on those and you can actually see your progress and all the things you've achieved, all the challenges that you raised that hopefully got dissolved throughout the year, and it's easy for you to summarize at the end of the year. It's all about spreading the pain, so you're not just trying to think about everything at the end of the year. Timely feedback. I like this statement that says, I was doing this training by a guy called Nigel, and he said, feedback is the breakfast of champions. And I really, really think that's very true. When you get feedback, a lot of people sometimes get defensive if it's not all good, but really, really good feedback helps you course correct quickly, and that's why I've put on here timely feedback, not just feedback, because you can get feedback at the end of the year, but if it's something that you've been doing wrong since April, it's not really fair to give you that November, December time. So timely feedback allows you to course correct quickly, improve your performance, or explain, because sometimes you're getting feedback on something and you can then explain, well, that's not what I meant, this is what I meant, and then you can kind of course correct quite quickly. So this is quite key. Now, who do you have these conversations with? Your stakeholders, so not just your line manager. I think we're all now more and more in roles where we're not just facing off to our line manager. We've got lots of different stakeholders, so make sure you're getting feedback from all of them. When do you do this? Frequently. So you might have a regular time with your line manager, or if you're working on a project or you have a big presentation, you can reach out to the people you've presented to. Just make sure it's front and center in your mind, and you're frequently thinking, oh, I need feedback, who should I ask? And so that can improve your performance. Now, what are you going to be talking about? I've put together a SUN model to give you a little bit of a tick box exercise so you know how to plan your time. So I said, seek feedback from multiple sources. That's important. So not just your line manager. Again, sometimes people point to the breakdown in the relationship with their line manager as to why their performance is bad, or as a blocker. But your manager has one view of you. If you can show that the feedback is significantly different from your line manager, from other stakeholders, you've got something to stand on. But if your manager is saying one thing and you have no feedback from anyone else, then you've got nothing to show why that's not true. So it's really key that you get feedback from multiple sources, and that feeds to your line manager as well. Understand feedback. So again, listen attentively without interrupting. I can't say how key that is, because a lot of the time I think we've all been programmed to think that feedback might be negative. Even when you hear the word constructive or developmental, you just see it as something bad. So you go into a meeting really defensive, and as soon as someone starts talking, you're explaining why that's not the case. And I've been victim of that, so I totally get it. But listen attentively without interrupting, asking questions if you don't understand, you know, saying it back to whoever's giving you the feedback. So, right, what I'm hearing is X, Y, Z. And a great conversation about feedback should leave you with next steps. So if you think about, there's a model that comes to mind: start, stop, continue. So you want to leave that meeting with, what should I start doing that I'm not doing? What should I stop doing? And what should I continue doing? Because again, feedback, the whole aim of feedback is that it's developmental, that it tells you what you're doing well so you can continue to do it, tells you what you're not doing, and to fix a few of the things that you're doing, perhaps you can do better. So if you think about the stop, start, continue, leave each meeting understanding exactly what that feedback means and what you can do. A lot of the time, I think there's a lot of time spent around the understanding feedback, and because people are so defensive, a lot of time goes into breaking that down, breaking down the defensiveness. No, this is what I'm saying, let me explain it. And then the meeting wraps up and you don't walk away with, what does next steps look like? What does improvement look like? And a handy tip for everyone, again, that extra mile that will make you really stand out, is to build a habit of giving feedback as well. So if you've been in a room, and I've been a recipient of this, and it's been a really lovely surprise where I give a presentation and then I'm walking out the room and one of my colleagues in my team who's seen me, you know, flapping around making the presentation says, that went really well, B. It just kind of makes them stand out to me as well. So building a habit of giving feedback. Remember, the main aim is developmental. So talk about what went well as what they can improve on. And if you've got examples and evidence, then that's brilliant. And if you can make it timely, so if the feedback refers to something that happens in March, don't wait till August or September to do it. Do it in the round so that it makes more sense to the person you're giving feedback to. And then the dreaded annual reviews. For those of you who haven't had the joy of writing a self-review, this is where you get the opportunity to talk to your line manager and try to say to them, I've had a fantastic year, I've done all sorts of things. I always say to people, make sure this is why I've said in the conversation you've been having, talk about your developments, talk about your challenge as well, because it also shows your commitment to your development as well. So you communicate to your manager your evaluation of how you've done. So basically you're marking your own exam and saying, I think I got an A, or I think I got a B, and then they tell you whether that's true or not. It's normally a conversation with you and your manager. Normally takes place at the end of the performance year. And like I said, it's a summary conversation of all the little conversations you should have been having throughout the year. So when we talk about how you approach your annual review, again, similar to every great conversation, be prepared. So have a summary of your performance, include your examples, any feedback, any evidence of how you've ticked all the boxes to say you've met your objectives, whatever best demonstrates your achievements, make sure you've got that on there. And again, here's where your notes from previous meetings during the year and all the little milestones that you created for yourself will come in handy. Actively listen, so similar to a feedback conversation, you should be listening to what the line manager is saying. But like I said, it's a two-way conversation, so you should be giving some challenge. If they're saying anything you don't understand, make sure you're asking questions to confirm that you understand what's being discussed. Remember that the annual review is not just about your achievements, so any challenges that you faced during the year, how you overcame them, any lessons learned. This reflects that you're committed to your development, and what then happens is, based on some of the things that you faced, it might form, you know, some of your objectives for the following year, or might feed into your personal development plan for the following year as well. This is what I say all the time. Every time I go into a grievance or a disciplinary where there's a mismatch between what the line manager and what the colleague thinks has happened from a performance standpoint, getting a rating or getting an assessment at the end of the year shouldn't be a surprise. Like, you shouldn't be an underperformer and be none the wiser and rock up into a room and get told, sorry, your performance needs improvement. If you've been having those conversations, seeking feedback, asking questions all throughout the year, you should get to the end of the year and this shouldn't be a surprise. And a handy tip, as usual, with every conversation, capture it. Make sure it's recorded. Make sure any actionable steps are recorded, because it's all going to happen again as soon as you click the button and you get into January or whenever your performance years start, it will all happen again. Right, so I'll do a quick recap before we kick off for questions. I think I'm doing just okay for time. I think I'm running a couple of minutes, but if there were only 3 things you can take away from this session, it will be these. The only thing you have 100% control over when thinking about your performance is you. The art of performance management is all about great conversation. So like I said, the only nuances are what you talk about, when you talk about them, and who you talk about them with. But when you boil it all down, it's all about great conversations. And this is really key, how you make performance and development conversations really work for your career success. Right, I'm going to keep quiet now. I think I've been on for quite a while. Winnie, have you got questions in the chat?
That was a fantastic session. Thank you so much, Bea. I've taken so many notes of my own, but there are some people itching to ask questions. So I'm going to start with a question from Alaide, which says, how can you steer the conversation towards the career conversation if your boss wants to focus on a conversation about your job? So back to that piece around career conversations versus developmental conversations, or how do you kind of steer that back if the leader is just focusing on your job?
So what I tend to do is when I talked about the frequency of those conversations, so you might have a one-to-one weekly or monthly with your manager, but then you want to put a meeting in that says development conversation. My old boss was great at this. So we would have conversations every week and it was very performance focused. When we came to the development conversation, if we ever veered off, and sometimes it was me, sometimes it was her, starting to talk about task and performance, and we had to reel ourselves in to say, no, this is about development. So the title, the time sectioned away for this. So don't try and talk about it as one of your normal one-to-ones. Make sure it's sectioned out, and so that your line manager comes to that meeting knowing that this is a conversation about your development. And when they start to veer off, you then say, well, we've got a meeting on so-and-so day, which is our normal one-to-one, so we can talk about performance then, but this is about my development. And you can really control that narrative. And that's what I mean about once you know what you want to do and you set those reminders and put those meetings in, it really helps you structure it. Because sometimes it's not that the manager, it's just because everyone's so busy, but you need to make sure you make that time to devote to your development.
I love that. And I think it goes back to the point you made about taking control. So absolutely, really taking ownership. And you talked about preparation being key. Twice, actually, you mentioned that. And I think Bridget's question aligns really well with that. She asked, how does she set an agenda for her one-to-one?
Right. So it's the context for that will be unique to yourself. I can use myself as an example, depending on what meeting I'm going into. If I'm going into a meeting with my boss and it's around my performance or just a regular one-to-one around tasks, my agenda will normally be a list of things that I need to update her on, any challenges that I have that I need her, so I'm kind of escalating to her. And then if I've got any achievements to kind of say, yeah, I've done this and it's gone great. I actually just have an agenda where I have those bullet points and I tend to send it across to her. Again, here's how you start to manage people around you. So I find that when I send that email saying, right, we've got a meeting, maybe in a couple of hours or tomorrow, here are the things I'd like to cover. Have you got any points? It kind of getting them in that, oh, she's serious, right? We've got stuff to cover, because I'm quite chatty and I tend to have bosses that are chatty. You get in there, you have half an hour, you spend 20 minutes talking about homeschooling children, and then you don't have time to talk about anything else. But you have an agenda, you go in there and it kind of keeps you true to what you're in that meeting to do. The same with feedback. If you're there to ask certain questions, list those questions. If you can, share it beforehand so everyone's aware and everyone comes prepared. The worst thing you can do is with someone who's really senior, really busy, you finally get half an hour with them, they don't know what you're coming to talk about. They get into the meeting, they don't have an agenda. You then ask them a question and they're like, wow, I wish you'd sent this to me a week ago. I would have had this, this, and this ready to share with you. So if you can share it beforehand, it really helps to structure those conversations.
I absolutely agree. And I love that you've nuanced managing upwards. It's such an important skill, and that in itself really demonstrates that capability and ownership over one's own performance. So I love that. Thank you, Bea. We've got another question from Joseph about cloud-based tools to capture regular performance and development conversations. So you talked about making sure we keep records, and we've also got a really good kind of template we're going to share. But are there any cloud-based tools potentially that Joseph can use?
I think what I might do, maybe as part of the email that we send out to everyone, if I find any, I have to put my hand up. I've been spoiled when it comes to looking for tools, because I've always worked for organizations where that's not been the problem. It's making the tool work for us, because we're in a company where you've got 90,000 colleagues. They don't kind of leave it to just us to determine who that is. But if I find a few, and I can ask from some of my colleagues if they've got any feedback on any that are quite good, I can share that after the session. But yeah, I'm sure there'll be loads out there. There'll probably be a free version that won't have all of the bells and whistles on, and then you might have to pay to get the extras. But that's one thing I know, that there'll be a plethora of tools out there that you can benefit from.
Absolutely. And we'll definitely do some research. I think this is one of the things we love about feedback. If you continue to share what kinds of things we can help and support you with, we'll definitely take that back as our homework and help as much as we can to get information. So thank you for that question, Joseph. We've got another one from Peace. And she's asked, how do you ensure the balance between performance and development conversations in a new role, especially if you're trying to prove your worth for a long-term opportunity? Thank you, Peace.
That's a good question, Peace. Again, I think this is about managing up, and I dare say a lot to do with confidence as well. I think a lot of the time, it certainly happened to me, where either I've moved role, or maybe I've been promoted, and then I've kind of psyched myself to think that I've been promoted into a role, and then everyone expects me to know exactly what I'm doing and to be at the top of my game, but I've just been promoted, right? So there's a piece around controlling the narrative and managing upwards, where, like I said, if you say to yourself, I want to have monthly conversations about performance, but I want to have quarterly conversations around development, and I talk to stakeholders as to where I want to be, what's realistic. I mean, if I'm a really junior person, it needs to be realistic. I can't be thinking I'm going to be a managing director in like a year, right? So talk to your stakeholders, find out what's a realistic ambition plan, that's a long-term plan for your development, and make sure you're carving out the time to do so. And when you join a new team, even if that manager, again, this is similar to what I said at the start, you don't have control over your line manager, you don't have control over the culture of performance in your team or in your company, but you have control over you. So you go in there and you kind of almost school your line manager to say, right, here's what I need from you. I need to have performance conversations, and I need to have conversations about my development. I need you to support me in this way, but you have to drive that. I think a lot of the time we join teams, we're so frantic hitting the ground running that we are waiting for the line managers to approach us to say, right, we need to talk about your objectives, right, you have to drive that. And it's all about, you know, the 5 minutes you've got in the chaotic world, putting some systems in place that will nudge you and remind you to make sure to have those conversations, but you control the narrative. So you really have to, you know, even if you're in a space where it's brand new or you've just been promoted, it's the same thing. It's all about making sure you're managing up and managing expectations. I hope that's answered your question a little bit, please.
That was a very good answer. And I think absolutely the point around being very kind of assertive around managing your own performance, I think sends a very positive message to your leaders to take your performance and your career very seriously as well. So thank you. That was a great response, Bukola. I've got one more question from Alaide. It's reward and recognition. How do you go into a conversation about this confidently?
That's a multi-layered, multifaceted conversation, and it's one where it's really uncomfortable. There's lots of stats to show that from a gender perspective, a lot of females tend to not want to have this conversation compared to men. I think what will make you more confident to have those conversations are data. You need to have data. If you don't know what you're asking for, or what you serve, or what you're worth from a role perspective, you can very easily get bamboozled. So I think it's important that you have some market. Why are you asking for more? Is it because of the value you're adding, or is it because the role that you do deserves a certain amount? I think to be able to be confident in those conversations or to be assertive, you need lots of different data, market data on, you know, what these roles are going for, market data on the value that you bring to the team. Because sometimes you might be in a role where perhaps the market industry states this, but what are you need to go in there saying, here's the market data and here's how I'm contributing. So again, we go back to a lot of those regular check-ins and the achievements that you've been able to highlight or the milestones you've been able to take. That adds to your story as to, I'm worth this because I've been able to do this, this, and this. I've been able to contribute to your cost saving. I've been able to raise this amount of revenue. You need to have to marry that to the market value to show that here's what's going to walk out the door if I leave, all of this value, and this is what I'm going to get when I leave. So how do we marry the two so that we're both in agreement? I tend to think that these conversations work better when you have a good conversation with your line manager or a good relationship with your line manager. So again, I stress those regular check-ins, they're great because it's not a conversation you want to just have. You need to kind of be planting the seed over those conversations. Here's what I'm adding, here's what I'm adding, and then halfway through, boom, here's what the market data is saying, but you've already proven yourself as a valuable member of the team. I hope that helps.
And I think it aligns back to the point you made about alignment. If your goals are in alignment with your boss's goals, they'll feel very confident rewarding you for helping to make them look good, right? So I think you've really set us up, Bukola, for a really good narrative on all of the important things to consider right down to the end. And we don't have any more questions, but I for one know that I've taken so much from the session, and I can see from all of the responses we've had on chat that there's been so many people who've taken lots of notes. So thank you so much. You've given us a wealth of knowledge. In terms of things to look out for, everybody, so first of all, we've got a March event coming up very, very soon. It's going to be on intrapreneurship. So for those who were at the event last month where Lorraine Wright talked about intrapreneurship and how to make an impact in your organization, we've actually collaborated with an organization called Circle of Intrapreneurs, and we're very excited to bring you our first panel event on this very important topic. And I think it really aligns to what Bukola has spoken about around how to stand out from a performance standpoint in your organizations and find ways to be able to make an impact there. So hopefully that will be valuable. So please look out in your inboxes for something coming out next week on that. We also have a few volunteer roles on the team. So we're looking for someone to help us with our social media and also with our events. We're an amazing, fun team. I'd like to think that all of our team love working together. We certainly enjoy working together with them all. So if this is something that would be of interest to enhance your CV, then please don't hesitate to drop us an email on info@accelerate-blackfutures.com. We also ask that you please complete our feedback survey after the session, because we take all of your feedback to make sure that we plan events that will be relevant to your needs. So please do keep that feedback coming. Last time someone mentioned needing an event around the medical field, and we are on it. We are doing our homework to schedule something. So we are listening, we promise. So keep that feedback coming. We'd love to hear from you. I wanted to finish off by saying a massive thank you, first of all, to Bukola. This has been such a valuable session, but also to everybody else in our team. We could not do this without you. We've got such a strong, phenomenal team. Tina, Eleanor, Keji, Harry, thank you so much for everything that you do. But also a massive thank you to everyone who's taken the time to join us on this evening session. It will be recorded and shared on our YouTube channel. So please subscribe if you aren't already. Just search us Accelerate Black Futures on YouTube. But also don't forget to add us on all of our social media platforms, on LinkedIn, Instagram. We're everywhere, so please just search us and you'll find us. But if not, don't hesitate to drop us an email. I call that 9 o'clock, bang on time. B, you were really good on time. So thank you, everybody, and have a wonderful evening. And we look forward to next month. Take care, everyone.